we get a lot of phone calls of people with 5-stage RO systems, and they say, well, you know, what's a permeate pump, and why should I use a permeate pump, and how do I install the permeate pump? So we're going to talk about it a little bit here, and then we're going to install one on this system. By default, when we get done, you'll kind of know how a permeate pump system is plumbed as well for people that bought a system with a permeate pump already on there. Now, on standard systems, again, you have what's called an ASO valve. This ASO valve is what shuts the system down, and it shuts it down based on a percentage of the incoming pressure. Most ASOs are going to shut the system down at 65% of the incoming line pressure. So if you're feeding the system at 60 psi, then arbitrarily, let's say it shuts down at 40 with an ASO. So that means you're only going to have 40 psi out to your faucet. Now, with a permeate pump system, the water's going to shut off at the equivalent pressure of your incoming feed. So if you have 60 psi feeding it, then you're going to have 60 psi at your permeate faucet. This becomes much more critical when we're adding several faucets to the system, or we're adding a faucet ice maker, things like that. This becomes a lot more critical and makes more sense to use. To install this, it's going to install a lot different than a typical ASO type system. First of all, the ASO valve is totally eliminated, and then the plumbing is a little different. So the first thing that I do when I'm going to install a permeate pump system on a standard system is I remove the ASO valve, and I just remove the tubing and everything, because we're going to have to recut some of this tubing anyway. So I remove all 4 connection points and then put this to the side. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run our feed water directly from our post-carbon filter to the feed line, or the feed side of the membrane housing, because the permeate pump comes in after the membrane housing in the permeate line. That's why we call it the permeate pump. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to run water directly to the membrane from the post-carbon filter. So we're going to put a tube in the membrane, and we're going to run it nice and neatly, measure it to where you want to cut it, and then I have tubing cutters here. You can use a razor blade if you like, but these tubing cutters make it really nice. We have these on our site as well if you want to buy a tubing cutter to have around. But it makes a nice square cut. It's really important that this is square. If you cut tubing at an angle, when that O-ring goes in there, it's only going to seal on some of the angle. You want to make sure this is square so that O-ring can seal evenly all the way around the tubing. So once we do that, then we're going to hook that into the outlet of the post-carbon filter. Now we have water going through the 3 filters, out of the post-carbon filter, all the way into the membrane housing feed. Okay, once we've done that, now we need to plumb in the permeate pump. I'm going to remove this filter so we can mount the permeate pump and we can start doing the connections. Now, if you look on this permeate pump, you can see that there's a permeate in, brine in, permeate out, and brine out. So that would mean permeate in, permeate out, brine in, brine out. Brine stands for the drain, permeate again is the product water. So when we put this together, we're going to need to use this as orientation to know which tube goes where. So I like to roll it up here so I can see it when I'm putting it on here, and I will snap it in place for now just so we can see what's going on with it. Now when you get these pumps, they have these plugs in here, and that's just to protect these pumps so no contamination gets in there. So you're going to need to remove all your plugs right off the bat. And again, you do that by pushing in on the little collet with your fingernail, pulling it directly out. So the first thing we need to do is we have to plumb in the brine out, or the brine in, I'm sorry. So the brine in will now come from the flow restrictor and go to the brine in port. Well, the way it's currently plumbed, we don't want to run a tube out here and come way back. So we're going to shorten this up a little bit so it makes more sense. Again, make sure you have your flow arrow correctly on here. This is your drain, so the drain should go on the offset port of the membrane. There to there. And now we're going to run a tube from here to the brine in port here. Now when you get your permeate pump, you should get you some of these 1/4 inch push fittings, because that'll help keep this tubing from binding. And then I usually stick the tubing in and then give yourself some slack, measure it and cut it. And we're going to put that to the brine in port. Now, the brine out port is now your drain line that would go from here to your actual drain of your home. So we're going to leave that open for now. But one thing that is critical about this permeate pump is that this brine out port be higher than the brine in port. So let's say your final resting point for the permeate pump is here. You want to make sure that this port is higher than this one, so you would rotate this around until that's higher. That's important to be able to make sure we push all the air out of this system. If we had it like this, we could get an air pocket trapped in the bottom of the pump. So we want to make sure that that is up that way. Now that we've done that, we're going to hook our permeate line up. Now, this is on the Aquapurion system, so the check valve is in the elbow again. Now, if we were dealing with an external check valve, we would want to make the connection after the check valve and up to the permeate pump. This is going to be the permeate in line. So you can see that it says permeate in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to run from this check valve or the inline check on another system, and we're going to run it up here to the permeate in line. Okay, so we're going to put an elbow in again just so we don't kink the connection. And we're going to measure it off, or we want to cut it. Cut it nice and square. Install that in the permeate in line. Okay, now once that's done, the permeate outline will go to the post carbon filter. So we're going to have to install the post carbon filter back on now. And again, I'm going to put an elbow in the permeate out. And now we're going to roll this around to its final resting place so we make sure this last tubing connection is good. And as you can see, I have both my in ports lower than my brine out port and my permeate out port. So now I can run a line from the permeate out elbow, and we're going to run it down into the post carbon filter T. Okay, and that is permeate pump installation on the RO system.